Hello. This panel is about what can Europe and Asia learn from the North American psychedelic industry. My name is Greg Kubin. I'm the host of Business Trip, a podcast about psychedelic entrepreneurship. And I'm also a partner at PsyMed Ventures, the largest syndicate investing in psychedelic medicine. Our two panelists today are Bek Muslimov and Nick Murray. Bek is from Leafy Tunnel. They are an early stage VC investing in alternative health to treat mental health and pain disorders. And Nick Murray is from Wake, which is a vertically integrated medicinal mushroom company focused on fungus biosciences. So today we're gonna have a nice long conversation about the dynamics within North America and how they can be applied to Europe and Asia. Before jumping into that, would love to hear from you, Bek, at first around the kinds of companies that you've been focused on in your investing, both American companies, European companies, and how you think about the North American market and when you're making investing decisions, how it kind of, how you think about the regulatory framework, both here and abroad.
Sure. So yeah, let me start with Leafy Tunnel. So we early stage VC invest in seed Series A stages of companies. So we will look at alternative health. So cannabis and psychedelics will be alternative health, which will treat mental health and pain disorders. So from European angle, we focus on cannabis primarily. So we invest across value chain. We focus on downstream part of the value chain. We invest in distribution, we invest in processing, invest in ancillary services. On psychedelics, we will look beyond than Europe, so we invest globally. We have already 6 investments in our portfolio. On the psychedelic side, our investments include biotech companies which involved with drug development. So one is Latin Life Sciences, another one is Bek Muslimov, which is based in UK. And on ancillary services, we invested in Maya Health, which is a software to help psychedelic practitioners to measure patient outcome during psychedelic assisted therapies. We also invested in Synthesis Institute, which is enabling the ecosystem through education of psychotherapists. So those investments will tell, I guess, the segments that we invest in psychedelics.
Gotcha. And Nick, if you want to give a bit of background around Wake and kind of how you think about the market, focusing initially on North America and maybe your views around expansion in the future.
Sure, Greg, happy to. Yeah, Wake is a medicinal mushroom company that is vertically integrated. So we grow in Jamaica. We have a 50-acre farm. Our partners, Terry and Ronald Smith, have been growing mushrooms for over a decade, and they've really assisted us in really hitting the ground running, so to speak, both with the government as well as with their mycology experience. Everything is tested locally with our university and private partners, and then it is exported either to Canada or the US, and that is either the psychedelic varieties or the functionals. Psychedelic obviously has to go through many more hoops, and that works with our DEA partners, and then here in Canada with our Health Canada partners to ensure it comes in legally and lands at a licensed facility. But once it's there, that's where our testing goes, either into a clinical trial or they are bottled and out for shipping to our customers on the functional side of things. We've really been working with a lot of the regulatory bodies in Canada and the US, and so we know that path fairly well. Our chief strategy officer came from Canopy, and he was the first to do the import into the US of cannabis. So knows the same players that are required for managing psilocybin, either to Canada or the US. And with the view of this talk into Europe, into Asia, I think there's a lot of learnings to be had. I think, when I look at Canada, it's nice that we have a cohesive system rather than kind of a state by state. It makes things a little easier for us. And the EU perhaps could learn from that. I know it's difficult to make decisions across many countries, but if there was more of an EU mandate regarding psychedelics and the acceptance for research purposes, I think that would help to further things along a little bit faster.
Nick, could you talk a bit about your sourcing and your ethical sourcing? Because I feel like there's probably a lot to be learned there in terms of best practices that can be applied abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point, Greg. We've really noticed that with COVID, it has really brought sourcing to the forefront. People have become a little more aware, a little more hyper aware of where things are coming from, what's in them, if they've been tested. If so, is there a certificate of authenticity, a certificate of analysis that's available? So our sourcing is always done right from the substrate. Again, we grow our own product, so we test the substrates that we use within our production, and that's for microbiology as well as for heavy metals. And I think those are two things that are missing within the functional world, but that bleeds into the psychedelic world. So a lot of the time, it's either not required for testing, or it's gray market. So it's very difficult to have testing. But I think it's very important that microbiology and especially heavy metals are being tested for when it comes to anything that we're putting into our bodies, especially things that are either health supplements or meant for psychedelic assisted therapy.
Nice. And I guess changing gears a little bit, Bek, wanted to talk about your experience investing in cannabis and seeing if there are any learnings from that kind of ecosystem that can be applied in this conversation.
Sure. I'll talk about from a European angle. So what we see in European cannabis sector is that it is an exciting opportunity for entrepreneurs and founders of cannabis companies to look at the pharmaceutical formulations. So it's not a coincidence that one of the largest cannabis pharma acquisition, which was GW Pharma, was acquired by Just Pharmaceuticals for $7 billion, and that it was no coincidence that it happened in UK. So there is a big void for new cannabis pharma companies, and the reason for that is that US, although it's a very advanced on the cannabis regulation side, in terms of clinical trials for cannabis, there hasn't been much work done, and I explain why. So the federal prohibition doesn't allow for clinical research to be undertaken, and universities, for example, they're not able to run clinical trials, and there are interesting stories how they bypass that federal prohibition. There are stories that those universities, they assemble minivans that go outside of the borders of the university to run those clinical trials, and then which allows them to comply with the federal regulation. But obviously, you cannot do this at scale. And whereas if you look at Europe, we don't have that problem. And we know that in pharma, a lot of companies, they emerge normally from spin-outs from big academic institutions, or Beckley Psytech, for example, we invested, it's a spin-out from a Beckley Foundation, which accumulated 20 years of research. So spin-outs from universities, it's a perfect breeding ground for new entrepreneurs and new companies emerging. So from that angle, I see that Europe can take a leading role in the cannabis pharma, and for psychedelics, we're actually seeing that companies like Atai Life Science, for example, they were founded in Germany. Compass Pathways is based in UK. I think the reason for that is that there is less red tape in terms of the compliance with regulation, and that may be one of the reasons why those companies, they actually choose to be based in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of the academic institutions kind of supporting the research, or both academic and foundations, It's pretty amazing. In the United States, you have psychedelic research programs from Johns Hopkins, NYU, UC Berkeley, Harvard, UNC, Mass General, and then in Europe, you have Imperial College London, as you mentioned, Beckley having a foundation to start. It'll be interesting to see if more universities overseas will be opening their own research institutes. Do either of you have any visibility into that?
I know there's been some growth in the Netherlands and Portugal as well, and that's really thanks to their previously lax approach to drugs in general. But it would be good to see some expansion into France and maybe the Nordic countries as well, and then further east into Asia. It'd be great to see the academic partnership and maybe even private-public partnerships when it comes to research itself. We've really noticed a lot of kind of ripple effect when an academic institution takes it on either privately, a little more quiet than really publicly announcing. We do notice a ripple effect as far as companies that are spin-outs or at least benefit from their partnership. So it does further the governments and the regulatory bodies when they do have an academic institution that's willing to start the ripple in that country. So we certainly are proponents for academics starting the ripple, so to speak, in their respective countries.
Mm-hmm. So Bek, when you think about the adoption of psychedelic medicine, what time horizon do you think about? What milestones come to mind?
Sure. So I think we'll take two paths, right? So one is a medical, and we see Oregon in US, they took a ballot measure 109, which allows for psilocybin to administer in medical settings. So obviously those measures will accelerate the adoption. But then at the same time, it should be done also in parallel with the pharmaceutical route. And for pharmaceutical route, we see interesting host of companies emerging in this space, taking psychedelic compounds to treat psychiatric disorders. So Compass Pathway, I think, is the most advanced amongst those companies, and they run in trials with 216 patients, phase 2b trials, and timeline from phase 2b to full regulatory approval. It'll take about 4-6 years. So that's a pharmaceutical route, and we see other companies as well using psychedelic compounds to treat various psychiatric disorders. So I think there is a reason for pharmaceutical routes. I think we need to collect more clinical data on the safety and efficacy. So I think we should be cognizant of the fact that that we shouldn't put the cart before the horse. So the medical initiative, they should be also run in parallel with companies doing clinical trials and further studying the efficacy and safety profile of psychedelics.
Great. And how about you, Nick? How do you think about the time horizon?
Yeah, I echo a lot of what Bek said. It's I think that we will see the adoption within the psych world around treatment-resistant populations. So probably starting with depression, PTSD, PTSI, as it's known now, as the initial ones. And maybe it's because I'm much more familiar with the Canadian kind of adoption of psychedelics and how Therasil's been able to kind of get Health Canada to allow exemptions. And those exemptions have really been based on people who have either are in end-of-life anxiety or people who have indications that they basically tried 2 or more of traditional therapies solutions, so to speak, and haven't found any effect. So I think that that's how we'll see it coming in parallel with clinical trials going on, and we're quite active in those, and we really like to push those, because I think that's really what we're missing in this market is clinical trials, not only in the macrodosing world, but in microdosing, because most of the populations are microdosing. they're microdosing organic material. And so we've decided to focus in on that as far as our clinical trials, just to contribute to the art, to the science, really. But once we see the mainstream sees populations with these indications seeing positive benefit, then I think we'll see it filter down to the greater medical world, and then hopefully it'll actually be a first course of treatment rather than the last, as it'll probably start out as.
So with Wake, are you thinking about primarily serving the North America? Are you thinking abroad at this point, or it's kind of into the future?
Well, it's we certainly are looking to serve abroad. We're our functional mushroom line is for sale in Australia already, and as well as in North America. So we are looking towards the Commonwealth to begin with. It has a very similar structure as far as exemptions go for psilocybin as Canada does. So that's beneficial. And we do hope to eventually be able to serve the greater world as regulations allow. So certainly we see the mental health and the mental illness of our time as a serious issue, and it's only been exacerbated by COVID-19, unfortunately. So the more people that can have access to psychedelics in general, the better is how we see it, and we would be happy to help anywhere possible.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about stigma of mental health and your thoughts about, I feel like in COVID times, the stigma has reduced dramatically because I think everybody, to some extent, I'll speak for myself, have dealt with moments that are not high but low, and whether that's the occasional depressive moment or an anxious moment. And I feel like COVID has kind of reset the room such that people can be less stigmatized to raise their hand to share that they've dealt with something difficult. And I'm curious if you guys have thoughts around if you think this is a global moment of recognizing that, and where psychedelic medicine kind of plays into addressing it.
Yeah, let me take that first. So definitely, COVID exacerbated the mental health problem, which we all well aware of, and it's great that there is less stigma to talk about mental health. So we see, elite athletes speaking about mental health issues, and that's great because people become vulnerable. They talk about personal things, which is, and mental health is real, and that's being vocal about that problem, I think, is great for the industry, because then we will start trying to find the solutions. And the fact that FDA granted breakthrough therapy designation to MDMA, to psilocybin, to other to esketamine, and that's the reason that they desperate for novel approaches, novel modalities to treat mental health. And a lot of pharmaceutical companies, for the last 10 years, they were shutting down neuroscience research centers. And if we look at all healthcare categories, psychiatry has been underfunded for 20 years. There was a list, we see amount of funding that went into this area. And if we go down the same route, obviously that problem will accrue, and we'll pay the double price of that. So certainly having less stigma, talk about mental health, and recognizing that we need novel approaches, we need novel modalities to treat mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I echo what you say, Bek. I think it's high time that we really address it. It's so prevalent, with 1 in 4 experiencing mental illness in their lifetime, that we really do talk about it. And unfortunately, it did take COVID for us to all really talk about it openly and have a form of acceptance. I think we'll see this allowing for more people to seek psychedelic assisted therapy, and I think overall that's a good thing. It's unfortunate that what we've seen in Canada is end of life anxiety patients first, where really they waited their entire life to have access to this medicine, which is inherently safe, inherently non-addictive. So it's hopefully it becomes much more of a first treatment, and around first treatments, it's we are pioneering a cheek swab with the Lieber Institute to allow for an instant report to really guide the ability for the practitioner to help the patient decide on which psychedelic assisted therapy and which molecule would be best for them, as well as the amount. So it's quite an exciting time, despite it indeed being a bit of a dark time with regards to mental well-being. But at times like these is when we do see a lot of innovation. So we're quite hopeful.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so let's change gears here again for another sort of a different topic. Bek, you've invested in, I think you said 6 companies now, and looking to continue to invest in companies in this space. What are you looking for when you find a company that you're interested in? What's your investment criteria?
Team is the area we place a lot of emphasis on. So for us, and my background, I come from a tech VC perspective. So I've been investing in early stage tech for the last 7-8 years before launching Leafy Tunnel. And team is hugely important for investment decision. And when we look at the team, we look at the mindset as well. So we look at founders who wants to change and transform the industry. So with psychedelics, if we, let's say, take biotech, drug development companies, the drug development process can take up to 8 years before the drug approved. So the product itself will only be sold on the market in 8 years. And we're looking for companies which actually will deliver on that. Who companies and founders who wants to change the mental health and bring new paradigm, which psychedelics can bring, and that's number one criteria for us. And when we see companies who raise, let's say, seed rounds, and then they plan to do public listing with a huge amount of risk on the clinical trial side, I think that's for us might be a red flag. When the company become public, obviously that brings a lot of burden on the compliance with the stock exchanges, and can divert away the precious attention the founder need to in order to advance the science and run the clinical trials. So we will look for founders who actually whose intention is to transform the industry and bring the medicine to the markets.
Okay, and Nick, when you think about investors, what are you looking for?
Well, we're looking for people who have a bit of an intersection of specialty. So I found the most interesting and the most informative have a cross section, whether that be science and investing or tech and investing. They have kind of 2 domains of knowledge, and then together they're quite powerful. That's been my most impactful conversation so far, and also ones that come with a bit of an altruistic bent, not overly, but where they truly want to be involved for the right reasons in this burgeoning industry. It brings a lot of people in when people see big returns in the public markets, but having investors that have either a personal story or a family story, and really are in it for the right reasons, so to speak, where it's not just about a return, it's about an ethical and moral return. We usually get along quite well. So it's a little bit of both, but yeah, it's been quite an interesting ride meeting a lot of these investors.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious if there are any unsolved problems in this space that come to mind. Are there companies that you kind of want to exist but don't yet exist, or a theme that you're looking for, whether back from an investment side of things, or Nick, just maybe a partnership, or maybe something that you integrate into Wake at some point? What still needs to be solved?
I mean, I touched on it earlier, but I think the practitioner puzzle needs to be solved, and I think we'll see that with regulatory help, I hope. The problem we see in the market is we're producing a lot of psilocybin in Jamaica, and it's clean, it's tested, it's purified, it's able to be imported. But then it gets down to the patient, and the patient needs to have somebody who is specifically trained around psychedelic assisted therapy. We can't rely on all psychologists and all psychiatrists to go and get trained. Their time is too expensive to sit and in a 3 to 4 to 6 hour journey. And so finding a kind of a sweet spot where people with therapist background, maybe nursing background, can be trained and can assist, and it not take years of schooling. I think that's the cross section. And then intertwined with that is the decision on which therapy, which protocol, and then how much. So I touched a little bit earlier on the cheek swab that we've been pioneering with the Lieber Institute for brain development. That will allow for an inter mix between kind of, if you're all familiar, where if you go for prenatal screening, a very similar process, but checking for somebody's DNA against, let's say, how they'll interact with ketamine or how they'll interact with psilocybin, and then how much of each would be required if that's the right path for them. So a personalized approach, and then having the ability for therapists on the ground to assist either in a clinic or in a patient's home. I think those two are big requirements for the industry to progress.
Love it. I like when your answer is the problem that you're solving for. That's entrepreneurship right there, right?
We're trying.
Nice. And Bek, how about you? What are some unsolved problems in the space right now that you would like to see solved?
First and foremost, obviously, clinical trials that they need to be done, and I think it's a good reason that we go pharmaceutical routes. What I can say is that medical framework and pharmaceutical, they can coexist. And I think Mark mentioned that in Canada there are patients who at the end of their life and they suffer from depression, so they need the medicine sooner rather than later. So obviously they can't wait when the pharmaceuticals will be approved. So medical framework definitely has the place. And I'm based in UK, so we have that European angle when we look at investing in a space. Netherlands, for example, it's a liberal country, and then you can go and have a psilocybin therapy in one of those retreats, and that actually allows. We invested in Synthesis, which is started as a psychedelic retreat, and I was there at the Synthesis sites and saw and witnessed firsthand the therapeutic potential of psilocybin, and people who were coming. By the way, a lot of people were coming from North America. And treating various personal traumas. So that obviously a good thing that that medical framework exists, and that allows for people to access this medicine. So I guess the problem, I think, that should be solved here is that understanding that both frameworks can actually coexist and maybe even interact together for the common goal, to bring them and change the paradigm of the mental health therapies.
How would you define each of those two frameworks, Bek?
So yeah, medical framework. So we saw Oregon pass the ballot, which allows for psilocybin to administer it in supervised settings. So obviously that allows to get the access to the medicine without waiting for pharmaceutical companies to get the medicine approved. So that's one framework, and also Netherlands as well. But then we need clinical trials as well to understand the efficacy and the safety profile of psychedelic compounds, and actually maybe work on that and build even advanced science even further. So pharmaceuticals, and we invest in biotech, and obviously biotech companies, they need to as well to deliver on the financial returns to their investors, and they need patents, exclusivities, as all big pharma does, and I think that's already proven model that existed for centuries. So both models, I believe, they should coexist, and they should work together, rather than having people on both sides of the camp saying that one framework is better than the other.
Mm-hmm. Yep, makes sense. So in terms of just the ecosystem, there's hundreds of companies now. There's probably hundreds of clinical trials. How do you keep track of it all, both from an entrepreneurial standpoint, from an investor standpoint? Do you have any systems? Do you have any? What are your inputs?
We obviously we work quite closely with academic institutions, Imperial College. Also, there is University of Basel that run trials with MindMed. So obviously, having the access to academic allow us to keep abreast of the developments that happen in and Imperial College, for example. They run a really interesting study where they compare, I think first of its kind, where they compare antidepressants versus psilocybin. I think that study haven't been done, have never done before. So it's amazing that they're doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll echo Bek. It's also using Google Alerts is quite useful, and then fellow founders. We have either a weekly or a bi-weekly cadence where we catch up. The new advent of Clubhouse has been quite useful actually as well. There's some interesting psychedelic catch-ups on a weekly basis on Clubhouse that's been kind of nice to do. And then I've recently found your podcast, the business paper. So it's our business trip. Sorry, that's really good. So hats off to you on that one.
Yeah, Greg, I think it's one of the best, to be honest.
Thank you.
That is out there.
Thank you. More to come. All right. Well, I feel like we've touched a lot of ground, both in terms of topics and geographically. I'm curious if there are any questions or thoughts that each of you have that are kind of unsolved, kind of on the edge of things that you're trying to figure out. Immediate sort of challenges or problems.
I'll ask you, Greg. What do you think is the best way to make psychedelic assisted therapy scalable?
The best way to make psychedelic assisted therapy scalable. I would say a few things come to mind. One is adequate training for therapists, right? Coming up with the right sort of curriculum and protocol, and making sure that enough people know how to actually administer and guide. I think that making sure that we have the right risk and mitigation strategies, which kind of links to the therapists, because of the fact that the psychedelic experience is so powerful and everybody's coming at it from a different place, right? So as a result, we need to make sure that we have like the proper guardrails in place. I think we need to figure out ways to make it affordable and prioritize access, because it seems like the first wave is going to be quite expensive, or already is kind of quite expensive. Ketamine therapy treatments, those run a few $1,000s. The first psilocybin therapies seem to be in the and MDMA in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. So making sure that it is affordable and potentially covered by insurance. Like, that's the holy grail to me. If insurance companies determine that the care is, it's basically worth the trade-off for them to cover it versus the long-term, costs of any individual who is suffering from mental health conditions, that solves a lot of these problems, frankly. And I would say something around like perception of psychedelic treatments, but frankly, I feel like that's being solved right now. It feels like the adoption of the narrative that psychedelic medicinal treatments are truly therapeutic and can be a first-line treatment for a range of indications. I've been pretty amazed in the past year or two of just, there hasn't been too much pushback yet. I say yet because I'm sure it will happen inevitably as it becomes more and more real that this movement is taking shape. Yeah, I would say those are the top things for me. And then, yeah, I feel like the first wave, you kind of talked about it, Nick. I feel like the first wave of people that are seeking out these treatments are, whether it's end of life or having a treatment-resistant condition, because they need help like now, today. And I'm excited when we get to a place societally when it's more acceptable for not just psychedelic medicine being perceived as something to treat illness, but to be for the betterment of the well, which is frankly how it's been outside of this whole medicalized context for lots and lots of people for a long period of time. So I think that's kind of like V2 of the perception changing. V1 is like, we need these therapies today to treat a lot of populations that are at risk and suffering. And then sort of the next wave, I think, will be one analogy I heard, which I liked, was like, a dental check-in, right? You go to your dentist twice a year, at least some of us do. And the same could be said for a psychedelic treatment that, is an opportunity for us to process information about our lives, look at ourselves in a very candid way, improve things about ourselves, and just live a more fulfilling, connected life. So, yeah.
Yeah, Greg, I think it's a great analogy that you used for dental treatment, and I believe that that's an analogy to be used for describing psychedelic as a new paradigm of mental health therapies, because we're talking about episodic treatment. So current standard of care, it's a chronic treatment, so you need to rely on antidepressants daily, and new modalities. It may not have 100% curative effect, but at least I think it's a great analogy that you used for dental treatments. And Nick, I will have questions to you. Obviously, as an investor, it is much easier to work in this industry compared to founders and entrepreneurs who's doing all the great work. And so, what are the key challenges that you face in running your business?
It's a good question. Well, currently, I mean, COVID has not been a friend, but we've made the best of it. So a lot of our researchers have been able to continue to do their work remotely. But it would be great if they could be in person for some of our studies and for meetings with the universities, etc. And I think it's the coming, soon to be, but not there yet, mainstream adoption as far as for investors' eyes. There's definitely the early adopters when it comes to the investment world, and they'll be rewarded quite handsomely, as we've already seen. But the typical kind of mom and pop have yet to really dip their toes into it yet. You do have the excited retail investors that you've seen in the public markets, but it's still definitely much more of a speculation game than a mainstream one. And we saw the same thing with cannabis. So it's just purely a matter of time and positive outcomes, whether that's just anecdotally or from the research community. I think you'll see that sea change come. But both of those are things that time will solve. I think COVID we're going to turn the corner hopefully soon, and it'll allow for people to travel again, whether that's because they've been vaccinated or the numbers decline. And then the mainstream adoption, I think that's already starting to happen as far as investors and really accepting it as a true treatment and a true opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so last question. It's the year 2030. What does the world look like with psychedelic medicine as a modality?
I think it'll be respected as a first line, whether that's for depression, postpartum depression, post-traumatic stress injury. It will be treated as a first line of defense, so to speak, before we go for kind of more serious, more addictive medications. And I think we'll see people exploring psychedelics a little earlier in life because of the mainstream acceptance, because of the clean products available. And I think overall those are two very, very good steps in the right direction.
I agree with Nick. It'll be recognized by a worldwide community as a medicine, as a first-line treatment. And more than that, I think that is already sparking a new innovation happening in mental health. We're learning more about our brain and how the processes work. I think for neuroscience, for psychiatry, it's only the beginning, and I think that's the most exciting part. So it's not going to be the end. I mean, it's not to be the goal the end goal. So it's only going to be a beginning of something even greater in the development of treatment for mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I'm excited about is many psychedelics engender a feeling of connectedness and unity. So if you get to this place societally where lots and lots of people are experiencing these things for various reasons, and there's this heightened sense of connectedness and unity, and then you like throw the internet in the mix as this connected unity vehicle, it's a potent combination. I think it could transform society in ways that are hard to predict, but I think could be interesting and beautiful.
You're right. I think we're going to be more empathetic. We're going to be more loving and connected. I think that's what needs to be done.
Yes, we could all use a bit more of that. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Bek. We had a really nice chat today. If you have any closing thoughts, please feel free to share.
It's early days, but the wind's at our back, and here's to bringing a positive change to the world, guys.
Exactly, and can't wait to move the science further and work with all of you guys, and hopefully we'll meet in person once everything, all the restrictions going to be lifted.
Yeah,
sounds good.
Fingers crossed.
Perfect. Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
Thanks
you.
a lot, guys.